I left a six-figure job at IBM to join a startup I barely knew just because one man said he believed in my dream. Sounds reckless, right? But back then it felt like destiny, like someone had finally seen what I'd been quietly building for years while buried in corporate red tape. I didn't want a promotion. I didn't want another padded title. I wanted to bring Aegis Mind to life, and I needed the right soil for it to grow. That's where Virion Labs came in. They weren't the biggest name in cybersecurity, not yet. But they were bold, well-funded, nimble, and most importantly, they had Leonard Vance, the kind of CEO who didn't blink when I said I needed 3 dedicated servers and an unrestricted dev environment. The kind who said, I'm not investing in a product. I'm investing in a visionary. That visionary was me. My name is Grace Camden. I'm an AI systems architect with a specialty in behavioral cybersecurity. And I'd been carrying the blueprint for Aegis Mind, a predictive AI defense system inside my head and my notebooks for nearly 4 years. At IBM, I floated the concept twice. Both times it was shelved as too experimental, too ahead of its time. At Virion, it took Leonard 30 minutes to greenlight it. I still remember the warmth in his voice that day, the way he leaned back in his chair, laced his fingers, and said, let's build something the world's never seen. That moment lit a fire in me I hadn't felt in years. I moved into a studio apartment 2 blocks from the office I can-led. I poured my nights and weekends into coding, testing, rewriting, and refining. Every time I hit a wall, I pushed harder. Not because anyone told me to, but because I believed. Not just in Aegis Mind as a product, but in its purpose. The world was evolving faster than firewalls could keep up. Attacks weren't just brute force anymore. They were behavioral adaptive, almost organic. We needed a system that could think like an intruder, learn like one, and then neutralize threats before they even took form. That's what Aegis Mind was built to do. And for the first time in my career, I had the freedom, the funding, and the backing to make it happen. Was I nervous? Absolutely. But more than anything, I was alive, because this wasn't just a job change. It was a leap of faith, a full-bodied yes to the version of me that wanted more than safety. And as I looked out the window of my new office on that first morning, sunlight streaking across a blank whiteboard, I whispered to myself, this is where it begins. 18 months, 80 hours a week, 0 distractions. That's what it took to breathe life into Aegis Mind. People talk about passion like it's poetic, like it's this warm, glowing thing you carry in your chest, but real passion, obsessive, relentless passion, is raw. It strips you down. It takes and takes until the only thing left is the work. And I gave it everything. I wasn't just building code. I was building consciousness. Aegis Mind wasn't meant to be a static firewall or a passive system waiting for commands. It was designed to think, to observe, to anticipate, to evolve. It started with behavior modeling, teaching the AI how threat actors moved, how they disguise their intrusions. Then came the dynamic firewall logic, built to shift in real time like a living organism. After that, predictive, learning modules, data lakes, real time, simulation, tools. And on top of it all, a constantly adapting ethical core designed to ensure it would always serve protection, never exploitation. Every line of code had a purpose. Every sleepless night added a layer to its logic. I stopped going out, stopped checking social media. I missed birthdays, skipped weddings, my gym membership expired, and I didn't notice. My apartment became a storage unit for takeout containers and unwashed coffee mugs. But I didn't care because every time I ran a new test and the system responded faster, smarter, more intuitively. It felt like watching something take its first breath. Sometimes I'd look up at the clock and realize I hadn't spoken out loud in 12 hours. I lived in headphones and silence, in screens filled with cascading data. It was the kind of isolation that would have crushed someone else. But for me, it felt like purpose, like I'd finally found the one thing worth giving my entire self to. Leonard would drop in occasionally, always with that slick confidence of his, and a rehearsed compliment or two. Brilliant work, Grace, he'd say, standing just inside the door with his arms crossed, the boards thrilled with your progress. I'd nod, half listening. already scanning the next batch of code. I wasn't doing it for him or for the board. I was doing it because I knew deep in my bones that this system could change everything. Cybersecurity wasn't ready for what was coming. Threats weren't waiting politely at the front door anymore. They were crawling through the ventilation, slipping in through email headers and firmware patches. We needed a defense that learned faster than the enemy, that wasn't just reactive but predictive. That's what Aegis Mind was. It wasn't just a product. It was a guardian, a sentinel, and I was its architect. I didn't care that I hadn't taken a day off in over a year, or that the circles under my eyes were deep enough to cast shadows, or that my hands shook from too much caffeine and not enough sleep. Because every time that AI responded faster than before, flagged a simulated breach before it even started, I felt something stir in me. Not pride, not even excitement, devotion. I wasn't just coding, I was transferring belief into a machine. I was programming hope. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was working too hard. I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. It happened at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was the only one left in the building. The office lights had long since dimmed to night mode, humming quietly in the corners of the ceiling. Outside Chicago slept under a sky of amber haze, snow brushing against, the windows in gentle bursts. Inside, the only sound was the rhythmic clicking of my keyboard and the soft hum of the server rack beside me, my mechanical heartbeat. I hadn't planned to stay that late, but something told me tonight was different. The simulation I was about to run was the most advanced one yet. Adaptive threat scenario designed to emulate a highly intelligent multi-vector cyber attack, the kind that didn't just go after passwords or ports, but observed, waited, and learned. The kind of breach that governments feared and financial institutions quietly paid millions to recover from. I initiated the test and leaned back, holding my breath. On the monitor, I watched in real time as the simulated threat deployed. It behaved like a ghost, slithering through a worked environment, silently disabling protocols, mimicking user behavior with frightening precision. For the first 10 seconds, Aegis Mind did nothing. I felt my stomach drop. Had I overreached, pushed the system too far? I reached for the keyboard, instinctively ready to intervene. But then, suddenly, the cursor moved. Aegis Mind pulsed. It wasn't reacting. It was observing, calculating, watching the threat unfold in silence, just like a real analyst would. And then it struck, like a flash of lightning. The system fired back in multiple directions at once, isolating virtual nodes, shooty, ng, down deceptive user processes, and rewriting access points on the fly. But it didn't just block the attack, it adapted to it. The longer the simulation ran, the faster Aegis Mind became. It wasn't just defending, it was learning in real time. It started flagging subtle behavioral anomalies that even I hadn't coded for micro-latency differences, abnormal mouse movement sequences that a human wouldn't typically perform, and then came the moment that made me sit completely still. Aegis Mind halted the final stage of the simulated breach, not because of a pre-programmed rule, but because it had deduced on its own that the attacker was preparing a system-level override. It stopped it before it even started. My screen lit up with a single blinking message: breach neutralized, adaptive firewall integrity maintained. I blinked, once, twice. Then I slowly stood up, backed away from the screen, and let the weight of it all hit me. It worked. It really worked. Not in theory, not in a white paper, not in controlled lab conditions, but here at 2:17 a.m. in the middle of an empty office in the realest way possible. I pressed a hand to my mouth as tears welled up in my eyes. Not out of exhaustion, not because I was overwhelmed, but because in that quiet, flickering moment I realized what I'd done. I hadn't just created a program, I had created something that understood danger, that responded, that evolved, that protected. I had created something that knew how to survive. And somehow, in its own language, it had spoken back to me. It had said, "I've got this." The emotion rushed through me like a floodgate opening. I thought about the 18 months of sacrifice, the nights I spent alone with cold pizza and crashing servers, the Holidays missed the birthdays. I forgot the people who told me I was wasting time chasing something too abstract, too impractical. I wish they could have seen this. More than that, I wish they could have felt it, because this was more than code on a screen, more than a breakthrough. This was proof of concept turned proof of life. I walked over to the whiteboard and picked up a marker with trembling fingers. There in the top right corner, where I had scribbled the phrase Phase 4, self-directed defense stretch, goal. I drew a bold green check mark. Then I wrote a single line beneath it. It thinks. I stood back, breath shallow, heart full, and I whispered to no one. I've created a mind that knows how to defend itself and maybe even how to live. I walked into Leonard's office, expecting applause. My heart was still racing from the night before. Aegis Mind had done something no other system had ever done. It had defended itself without a single human touch. It had learned, adapted, protected. I had proof. I had the logs I had built, something that worked beyond even my most ambitious projections. So when Leonard called a meeting for the next afternoon, I assumed it would be a formality, a stepping stone toward announcement. I imagined handshakes, maybe even champagne. Hell, I'd even practiced a short speech in the elevator on the way up, but when I stepped into the room, something felt wrong. Leonard was already seated. Across from him sat Miranda Steele, Virion Labs' general counsel. The air was thick and still. The windows behind them were slightly tinted, painting the skyline a soft gray. There were no smiles, no congratulations, just a manila folder on the table waiting for me like a silent warning. "Have a seat," Grace Leonard said. His voice was polite too, polite, carefully measured. I sat down, slowly, my laptop still clutched under one arm, ready to show him the demo results, but he didn't ask for it. Instead, he pushed the folder toward me with 2 fingers. We wanted to touch base before moving forward with next steps. He said, "There are just a few legal housekeeping matters we need to clarify." Miranda cleared her throat, folding her hands on the table. "Section 164 of your employment agreement states that any intellectual property developed using Vion Labs resources, regardless of conceptual origin, belongs solely to the company." The words hit me like cold water. I blinked. "I'm familiar with the clause," I said carefully, "but Aegis Mind was conceptualized long before I joined Virion. I have notes, models, email, records. That may be true." Miranda interrupted, her voice emotionless. "But the functional system, the deployable product that was developed on our time using our equipment," Leonard leaned forward and fingers laced together. "Let's be honest, Grace. Without Virion's backing, Aegis Mind wouldn't exist. You've done brilliant work, and the board recognizes that, which is why we're offering you a success bonus, $250,000. My body went still. $250,000 for 18 months of my life, for the code I poured my soul into, for the thing I built from nothing, piece by piece, with no roadmap and no safety net. Effective immediately," Miranda continued. "Your employment with Virion Labs will be concluded. You'll be asked to return your company-issued equipment and vacate your workspace by the end of the day." I stared at them. I didn't speak. I couldn't, because in that moment I wasn't just being terminated. I was being erased. A familiar ache bloomed in my chest, sharp, old, and terrifyingly familiar. Suddenly I was back at IBM, different, boardroom, same, betrayal,